with you a little bit about this document that you have, that you are seeing, and you are the first ones to see the results of the 25 interviews that were conducted this past summer. The Harmony Project, the big question was, what will it take for church musicians to thrive in the decade ahead? And I'll tell you a little bit about the demographic that we selected very carefully. And let me just start by saying it was very much a pilot project. This is Harmony Project 1.0. This was a test, if you will. But it was more than a test. We learned a lot. We interviewed 13 women and 12 men. We interviewed church musicians who were early career, mid-career, late career. So it's a small sample set, a sociologist would tell you, a data nerd would say, you know, it's a very small sample set, but it was a start, and it was an important start. Where did the idea come from? Let me start with that, and then I'm gonna pass it off to my colleagues who are so invaluable in the process. I have had the wonderful privilege of serving Wilshire Baptist Church, many of you know, for 18 years, and a part of Wilshire's ministry is a program called Pathways to Ministry, which is a pastoral residency program. Now, when Wilshire started almost 19 years ago, they were sort of it was the first of a Lilly endowed project. These have really proliferated in many other churches of many other denominations. Over the years, Wilshire has now graduated over 30 women and men who have said that they want to be a senior pastor or to serve the church in some way. And they come to us after going to divinity school or seminary, and they spend 2 years with us in a residency. It's modeled loosely after a medical residency. In other words, learning by doing. Learning by being, learning by reflecting on the doing. And this was the brainchild of George Mason and his predecessor, Bruce McKeever. In observing that and seeing how it was funded by the Lilly Endowment, I became aware of a couple of things. One, Lilly was really interested in clergy, meaning senior pastors. Very narrow in their scope. Why? Why were they so parsimonious, you might say? Well, here's the deal. They're a very data-driven organization, and they're incredibly philanthropic. But they discovered about 15 or 20 years ago in their data that there was an incredible wave of retirements, and there was going to be this enormous clergy shortage. For reasons I don't completely understand, they decided to do something about it. And a lot of the language about thriving that you see employed by other denominations, it all emanates from Indianapolis and from the Lilly Endowment, the Lilly Philanthropic Enterprises. It's a beautiful thing. But when we inquired just a little bit in the early days, could we get a little money for church musicians? It just wasn't happening. And I don't think it was a lack of interest. It was just a matter of the old economics principle of you have limited resources and therefore you have to make choices, even though they got a lot of resources. So at some point in the last couple of years, and maybe it was one of those spare moments during the pandemic, I thought, why not us? I look around at all you who inspire me so much, and I know what it's like at some level, and I know how challenging life can be. I know this is a good life, not an easy life. Why can't someone ask, what do church musicians need to thrive? And can there be an organization that focuses on the whole person, the church musician as a whole person? And we have many partner organizations. Let me just say, Youth Q, love them. ACDA, love them. Choristers Guild, love them. Presbyterian Association of Musicians. I've been to Montreat as a Baptist more than once. They let me in, you know. Right, okay? Yeah. Lake Junaluska, beautiful. You know, we're more alike than we are different. But I do think that our lane is this notion of what's it going to take for church musician and the art and craft of church musician to not only survive, but to thrive in the years ahead. So there's the why, there's some of the genesis, and there's some of the reason behind the research. Because I don't want to assume that I know what you need. Even though these bright veterans here, we could sort of guess. We want to actually have people tell us what it is you need to thrive. And this is a start. And what you have before you today is just a start.
When Doug invited me into this process, I really jumped in feet first, partly because of where I had just ventured, and also almost completely, I wanted to be a part of encouraging the next generations. And so when we discussed the interview process, we determined that almost wholly I would interview the women and Tim would interview the men. We did that thinking that we women, we could skip over the filling in the blanks about what is unique for women. I'll address that in just a moment. But what we heard in the overarching, and you can see in one of the appendices in the Harmony Project report, are the questions, or the guiding questions. We didn't ask all of them. We moved through them as the interview, as the flow of the interview went. But overall, between both men and women, what we found, one common denominator was when given the opportunity to tell us about their call to ministry, without fail, each one began with examples of how they were nurtured in music, either school or church, and that their gifts, your gifts, were called out by someone. Your gifts were recognized. And that is a very important part of our calling. It also weighed into how I interpreted it. I had been, but I will continue to call out the gifts in up and coming church musicians and current church musicians as well. Now, the report is not completely. It doesn't tell everything that we heard. We had to come with some. We did some base, and I'm going to go ahead and do that, Doug. Here's our list. Thank you. What we did, the summary of the 4 recurring themes that we found were: pastoral musicians need to feel their work makes a difference. Pastoral musicians long for relationships of mutual respect and trust, not only from the church members, but collegially within the people with whom they work. Pastoral musicians need affirmation and encouragement from similar others, like these Polyphony meetings in a larger context. And then one that sort of got added in after we'd gone through all of the evaluation, and then we realized, oh my goodness, pastoral musicians thrive when they make music with others. That is the most distinctive part of this study, and what we had. Our problem was we were in that respect we may have been a little bit too close. It was just like, oh yeah, but it's critical to thriving in ministry is that opportunity to make music with others. Now, things that didn't make the report that we put in what we called a parking lot, things that need to be pursued in the future. Coaching churches and search committees. I just want you to know we heard more, but this report needed to be at 30,000 feet. Helping with churches with sabbaticals, not just for the senior ministry. Helping particularly new ministers know how to negotiate salary and benefits. Early career money management and financial planning, we heard that. And then that's presumed for younger ones. But there were some things we heard that the older folks need is technology coaching. So these were the things, these were more specific. They didn't hit our report, but they didn't go unheard. And they will influence the next phases. And then the last thing I wanted to address before I pass it to my colleague Tim is a major thing that wasn't specifically addressed in the report, because actually it would have needed to have been a report in and of itself. And that is women in music ministry and the unique challenges, the challenges that are unique to women in ministry, women in music ministry in particular. Women in ministry, and when we did talk with early career, mid-career, and late career. Interestingly, there was at least in the women's area, the mid-career, there was a real gap. We had a lot of late career, and we had encouragingly new career, but the mid-career, and you can make all your deductions that you want from that. Now, but for women in ministry, a unique path to becoming a minister of music. Late career in particular, there were fewer role models. I had no role models. There are churches that continue to be not open to having women in ministry. One interviewee, and we keep this, we're not calling names, but in this, one was not allowed to major in church music because women did church music. My mother directed music in 1950s. She wasn't paid.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
What I'm getting back closer to my roots, and in fact, I'm driving to Alabama to go check on my dad in a little bit. But we weren't allowed to major. And aside, I went to Southwestern and studied under Robert Burton, and in my conducting audition, and I love these men. Robert Burton, David Keith, Joe King, they were such an impact. But that initial one, when I did the conducting thing, they said, you know, we haven't had a woman do the amendment conducting before. And back then, basically what you learned to do was, well, I'd sure like to try. But now, and this is not, but the next, by the end of that year, I was asked to be Burton's assistant conductor. So there was a recognition, and there was not a wall in front of me, but there was a little bit of a hurdle to overcome. Now, other things unique to women in ministry. Some have spouses who are also in ministry, and balancing the call. Which call are we gonna follow this time? I've done that, and it's an interesting balance that we have to work through. Common thread of caring for children while working, and sometimes 2 jobs. We have some who are part-time ministers of music and also teaching, and caring for children and all that entails. Not to presume that husbands aren't doing some of the work, but there is, we are the traffic directors, or had been, primarily. Now, many started in music education and migrated to church ministry. And that may have been the case with men as well, but I think the greater majority were for women. And then some, however, did take a direct path to ministry, seminary right out of college, but still had difficulty landing their first position because that we presume there were less churches open to hiring a woman in ministry. So those are the things that are dear to my heart. It would have taken an entire, as you can tell, it took me most of my report time to share. It would have taken an entire report to do that, and this was just the 30,000 foot. But we are digging more deeply into that, and we heard you.
I want to speak to process a little bit more, and I do want to encourage you, if you have not read this report, as Doug said, this was for you. This beautiful layout, the pictures, the font that was chosen, the pull quotes, this was for you. This wasn't for Lily at this point. For you. Okay. We decided, though, as a group, we were not going to sit here this morning and read you this report. We really want you to read this report, okay? Please. That's your assignment, please. Even on the plane on the way home. Great. If you haven't already read it. But to these 4 points, I want to tell you a little bit about process on how we got to them. You all are familiar with a word cloud, right? You work with a group, you get those words, you put it into a wonderful program, and you find out that that word was the word said the most. That inspired us to do something that Google allows us to do in a transcription, which we made a transcription of these 25 hours of conversation. Fathom that, all right? 25 hours of those questions, your answers that came back. How do you process that much information?
It was over 200,000 words.
200,000 words, Doug said. So what we did, thanks to the transcription and the ability to do a word search, we did a word search to find out which words popped up the most. We eliminated the. We eliminated those words. We wanted the words. And so, when you see those top 4 points, when you see trust, trust me, trust appeared that many times. Make sense, everyone? Yeah. So when we took that, thanks to that technology, and you'll read in the report, we met in Birmingham. We 3 flew together to be together. We took those words and we let those words find those points in the interviews so that we could pull what's behind that. This is a tough kind of empirical research, but we used that process. When we got to that point, we got to these 4 points that you see here. Now, 3 points, and as Susan said, the aha was, because we were too close to it, how many times you were talking about making music. Not only in COVID, but before and after. All right, we get to those 4 points. Now, since that time, well, it was back in the fall when we got together and we processed it. The report was written. We proofread it many, many times to make sure it was there. Everything was there. After that happened, I started working here in Tennessee with some of my Cooperative Baptist pastor friends, my own pastor. I met with a group of African American pastors, not sharing this report, but sharing some of my impressions. And here's what teachers here in Tennessee, I met with some teachers. And I started sharing some of my impressions about this work that we were doing. And it came back to me overwhelmingly, and I believe you're going to have this reaction too. These 4 things, or maybe these 3 things plus 1, the music piece, could be said about any teaching or caring profession. Fair enough, okay, fair enough. My wife, who I shared these with, said that could be said about preschool teachers. We are in education. That could be said about us. But we had to know, is that fair? We had to know that that is what you all thought. But we've come to these conclusions that this is what we need at the 30,000 feet level. And these are the words that you all said. So, in a teaching and a caring and a ministry profession, sure, these 4 things may be universal to other people, but now we know. And we'll speak to what in just a second. But now we know this is what we care about. Something else I want to say about process. We 3, and Doug is right in terms of research nerds, we always are aware of biases, limitations. That's why it was important for us to get together to make sure that we challenged any bias that we might have been bringing into the data. Okay, we're aware of that. I want you to be aware of something else too. These words I found out when I started sharing them privately, these words that you read might trigger something for you. When you read the word pastoral musician, Carrie, that could be a trigger. Who do we call pastoral musicians? Who came up with that term first?
Catholics.
Catholics. You could say, I'm not Catholic, I'm not a pastor. So please, may I ask you to get above trigger words? We did the best we could, but we are not, as Doug says, a social psychologist. We can't necessarily pin the word. Would you read that statement and think, what's the spirit of this point? Rather than, oh. Does that make sense, everyone? I didn't realize that we could be putting down trigger words here. And there was no, we tried to get away from trigger words ourselves. We tried to get to generic good words. But there's always that chance. And I promise you, if this ever went to a full report that was made public, we would run it by people that understand trigger words and say, and put some pressure on some of those words. Fair enough, everyone? Okay. And then the next thing I want to say, and I'm going to turn it back to Doug about process, is wow, as practical people, as people that are pragmatic, we often want to jump to solutions, don't we? So what? What are you going to do about it? We had to fight. How are we going to fix it? Because we're all fixers in this room. We're fixers. We had to fight fixing. We had to stay at 30,000 feet to say, identify the issues first. Okay. Now, exciting. I couldn't be more excited about it. Fixing. What are we going to do about it? That is the next step in this process. And I couldn't be more excited about that. I'll turn it back to Doug, and we all have a little comment about what's next, and then we want to hear from you all.
So, I wonder if we just
Jump to that?
Jump to what are your responses or your questions about that? Maybe that's also a thing that will inform our process, because we are planning for a Harmony Project 2.0. At this point, all I can say is I'm willing to say two things. We actually got a little money this time from a family foundation to do something. Last year, we did this entirely on our own shekels. The widow's mite, if you will. We have a very lean and mean budget, and we said this is so important, we're going to give up some other things in order to do this pilot project. We now have a modest grant to do 2.0, and at this point, we're going to be figuring out what that looks like, but whatever it looks like, it's going to be even more inclusive. We're going to cast the net wider. The spirit of the research will be the same. We learn some things. We'll probably tweak the assessment instrument, and we'll also certainly be modifying how we do the analysis on the back end. So we're all sort of going to school. So that I can promise you there's going to be a Harmony Project 2.0, and we're very excited about that. What questions or comments do you have at this point? I'd love to hear from you, because that can help shape our process going forward. Anyone?
It'd be interesting,
Yes, Tom.
perhaps, but to compare denominations, because we've already had discussions about how the musician on staff is seen differently according to whether they're an ordained person, which is more common in Cooperative Baptist, not common in Methodist or Presbyterian. Also, the role of women have had a greater role in Presbyterian music, much greater than I think you've had in the Baptist tradition.
Right.
It'd be interesting to make some contrast comparisons there to see how that might help. You might find more role models outside of the Baptist tradition.
So aspirationally, we do want to include more denominations, to your point. We want to include all like-minded church musicians in this. We're not trying to pilfer or proselytize them from denominational communities, but if there's a resonance with the spirit of Polyphony, we really welcome everyone. We want the 2.0 to be broader, and your point is well made. There are significant differences in the way church musicians are viewed, and my Methodist friends have been very helpful in helping me understand those different, how that's just different, from denomination to denomination, kind of who's clergy and who's not, and how clergy is defined from denomination to denomination. So, and it'd be interesting, Susan, for your thinking to think about women in ministry comparatively from denomination to denomination, because Tom was saying Women have had a prominent role in Presbyterian circles, maybe more so than Baptist in the South. Yeah. Another comment or question? Yes, Bob.
Question, the sampling here was full-time musicians, was it not? It was not.
It was not, the question is, was the sampling of the 25 all full-time musicians? Not all. Do you recall the percentage?
No, but I would venture that the percentage was greater in the women's sampling in order to make it as even a sample. We also went to part-time, those who were in part-time positions.
Yeah, and with the men, there were bivocational church musicians, and that had big implications on the financial picture for people. There's a different level of concern about this being their only source of income, and I think that had big implications on trust and vision and purpose.
John?
Yeah, as a Baptist, but after spending 22 years in the Presbyterian church, most of the musicians that I met in other Presbyterian churches were women.
John says most of the musicians he met in other Presbyterian churches were women.
As well as Montreat, it was just,
And Montreat.
they were the movers and shakers.
Huh.
I was in the minority. Now, I can't say that's the way it is in other areas, but that was just my experience. I found it very...
In the Richmond area.
Yeah, and even around the Presbytery, which included several other states, and it was very encouraging.
Okay. Carrie?
Well, the 2.0 approach, these questions were a little more, like you said, 30,000 feet up. Is the next wave, is there going to be more questioning, more interviewing, or are we done with that?
No, there's more interviewing
And so will those questions
to come.
be right? Or is there a general goal that they would be more specific, drilled down, like working with certain personality traits of pastors, or the denominational question, or, you know what I mean? Is it a little bit more nitty gritty?
So, great question, and it's a question we're wrestling with. Should the questions be more specific, and what are the possible outcomes if we make the questions more specific? And are we leading the witness? See, there's back to bias, right? Every good lawyer says you should know. Okay, we won't go there. But, so it's a great question. It's one we're wrestling with. I can tell you for sure the assessment instrument that we borrowed. By the way, a shout out to Dr. Matt Bloom at Notre Dame, who is the brain trust behind the Lilly Endowment Research. 15,000 clergy interviews, but that takes a lot of money to do it at that level. He was incredibly generous with us. I had a friend in Indianapolis who connected me with Dr. Bloom, who has a wonderful book, by the way, called Thriving in Ministry that we reference in the report, and it's worth buying. Because it'll speak to all of us, to the question of what does it mean to thrive. So that is really good, well-researched stuff from Dr. Matt Bloom. He actually sent us the assessment instrument he used at Notre Dame. He just gave it to us. And he had used that for both clergy and for healthcare professionals. And our initial assessment was based on his instrument. But now we continue to go to school on that. Other questions? Yes.
I wonder if, you talked about early, mid, and late career musicians. I wonder if it might be really prudent to talk about students.
I think that's fantastic.
There's a major problem. I'm interim right now at a university, and it's red flag. We are on fire. We do not have the students. They are not the level at all, even 20 years ago, of the students. And there's a lack of just clarity about what this role will be, whether this profession will exist. And in my book, if we don't invest in these students right now, they're all different ages. I teach from 19 to like 65, and I mean they're all asking the same questions. What do I do when I finish this degree? You know, and so that perspective is absolutely who we need to interview too.
So just so this can be heard on the recording, Philippa is suggesting we need to also engage students and include them in some way. I think that's brilliant. We really understand that this is a multi-generational art and craft, and if they're not students coming into the pipeline, then there won't be early mid-career, early mid-late career folks, right? I mean, we all get that. So that's a point really well made. Anyone? Back to John.
Question. You think there could ever be a way we could find out a way to have some pastors partner with us on this?
Can we find a way for pastors to partner with us?
Because we can get great information.
Understand.
And we can pretty much determine that as we lead our choirs, the way we do things, to develop the community and the right.
Right.
But if we're the only ones with the other information, the systematic information within the big body of the church, our colleagues need to know what we're about and why we're about it.
Right.
And some of us may have pastors that will gladly partner with us on this, and some may have pastors that could care less about it.
Sure.
And so I know they're all over the map, but I just
Right.
throw that in.
How could we partner with pastors? Let me offer this, and I think it only gets to that in an ancillary way, and we need to do more work on this, and we do recognize this. One of what does Polyphony exist for? To help nourish and encourage church musicians, to help primarily to help us make connections. You know, I think at root this is about relationship, right? And it's an antidote to isolation. However, I do think we can grow into being a platform as an advocate for church musicians. About a year ago, I wrote a piece in Baptist News Global, because my good friend Mark Wakefield is the publisher, so that was an easy entry. And I wrote it about churches that have fired church musicians in ways that were entirely uncalled for. And that week, Mark told me, and Mark tracks this kind of stuff, that week on Baptist News Global, that was the most read article. Now, very quickly, the news cycle goes on, even in religious news. But for just a moment, we had a voice that said, folks, pastors, you need to do better. And so if we can be your voice, because look, I am there still, maybe not for much longer at Wilshire, but I've been where you are, and I know you often cannot speak for yourself. So someone needs to be your advocate. And we want to be that. I think that's part of what we can do as an organization, and be more intentional and strategic about it. We've just got a few minutes. We're really looking forward to Diana's presentation in about 10 minutes. What would you add, Tim or Susan, and then we're going to wrap it up?
I'd say we agreed in the surveys that there was no doubt in the sense of calling with the people that we talked to. So, Philippa, to your point about students, I think if students are being called into this, then the question comes, how do we equip and how do you, yeah. So we didn't talk about this in the report. We didn't talk about anyone's sense of calling. Susan mentioned that they were nurtured in music early on. That was mission trips and by some great minister of music that we probably could even say some of the names that we heard, you all would say, oh yeah. Because there was a culture of that. We've lost that culture. So this is a bigger question about this sea that we're swimming in and the culture. I mean, my church is a good example, John, and I think some of you would resonate with this. We were Southern Baptist. You heard my choir last night. We were Southern Baptist. Then we were Cooperative Baptist. And now we're Baptist. We don't align with anyone. My pastor's getting ready to retire, and he's concerned that there's no pipeline to pull from, like who will know who we are if we don't align with somebody. And I think that's just a response to where we are today, is that there is no pipeline. So what the advocacy that I think Doug is talking about, folks, that's a big deal. The fact that Polyphony would consider being an advocate for our profession and our calling with the search committees and the pastors that we're talking about, don't think we're a drop in the bucket. I think it's a huge step in the right direction. Maybe we're a smaller cell, but I think it's a really important direction for search committees and pastors. If we become a resource for what they should be looking at and how they should be treating it and how they should be equipped, what skills do you need to do this? That's huge. So I think we should take some pride in this as a project. And I know I'm so invested and we're so invested in it that we feel that way. But I think it's an important step. And to Doug's point of advocacy, I think that's the word of the day. That's the take-home word for me, Doug.
And we have to say that this concern about the call to music ministry has been decades. We've been recognizing it. I wrote an article for Creator Magazine 15 years ago about the call to women in music ministry. And the premises are the same. Nurturing that call and then equipping for them to do that. So I see this report as a strong step, or this project in the continuation of the project as a strong step in that direction of at least identifying and more than identifying it, because we've been announcing it for decades. You know, we don't have the pipeline going. How do we restart it, or how do we continue? I think the Harmony Project is a wonderful step in the right direction.
We're going to wrap up in just a second, so you can just take a stand-up break or maybe get some water, and we're going to be excited to hear from Diana starting at 15 after the hour. I guess about 20 years ago, I remember reading a book called How the Irish Saved Civilization.
Yep.
Anybody read that book?
Yeah, it's a good book.
Now, if you're a serious historian, you might quibble about parts about that book. You know, I mean, it's popular history. It's light history. I get it. But it's a fascinating thing to just let your holy imagination run wild and imagine how things have been preserved regardless of the civilization, you know. And there's much to be said about being small and nimble. Bigger is not better. It's just bigger.
Said the Texan.
Said the Texan. Look, I wasn't born there, and I'm not going to die there.
It's a nice place to have lived.
Listen, I love Dallas, really, and I love the people. But you know, my wife would say, honey, if you're going to die here, you're going to die alone. Ryan, will you edit that out? Maybe you should edit that in. He just covered the camera. So anyway, take heart, Psalm 27. I believe that I shall see the Lord, I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Take heart, have courage. For a year, Psalm 27 is particularly important to the Jewish community in High Holy Days. And a local rabbi wrote an entire book that Wilshire read for a season on Psalm 27. And I remember, I've always known the Lord is my light and my salvation, you know. But I had never paid attention to the last bit of Psalm 27. I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And I pray that for us all. Yeah. So stay tuned. More to come about the Harmony Project.